Welcome to the Comstock channel. My name is Brian Hendrickson. Today I have Matthew Cruz with us to talk about Brazil. Welcome.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm good, hanging in there.
We are still accepting your yield results and will continue to do so through harvest. We received some results from Northwest Floyd County, Iowa. They said that they have done about 346 acres of corn with an average of 235 BPA, which is about their APH, feeling like their best corn is yet to come at a plus 20 BPA. They have not done beans yet, and almost none done close to them. 15 miles north of them, they have heard about 115 BPA average. 20 miles south, they have heard about 140 to 180. Any beans out are very poor in these areas. If you want to continue to send in your yield results, you can do so at the report at comstock.com. Thanks for coming on today. Like I said, we're going to talk about Brazil. Let's start with their weather. It's kind of been dry there. What does their forecast look like?
Brazil's planting season is still in the very beginning stages right now. Most of the focus goes to Mato Grosso as being the largest producing state in Brazil. They were officially allowed to begin September 16th. And so they actually mandate when the growing season ends and when it begins. And they do that mostly just to control Asian rust and other diseases because they don't have the strong winter kill that we get here in the United States. That's kind of one advantage. I know people complain of the cold in the winter, but it actually does a lot of good for reducing a lot of disease and insect pressure. And so Brazil is warm year round, more or less. It's just the rainfall levels is what changes. And so and it depends on which state you're in when those dates begin. And so, but in the case of Mato Grosso, for the most part, they started around September 16th, and so it's been a very slow start to that crop right now. There's probably less than 3% of the overall country has had begun planting. It's a little bit more than that in Mato Grosso. And so I've talked to a few producers down there that farm, and one said, no, I don't want to plant in September. I think it's too risky. The forecast is dry, and they're of the opinion that planting anything now is pretty high risk and to having to replant. On the other hand, I spoke to another producer that they started on day one, right on September 16th, and they planted 25% of their soybean area already. But now they've stopped, and because they're kind of concerned, they're waiting for more rain to come, and so it's kind of a throw of the dice. They're trying to get a jump start on the planting, and if it works out and the rain shows up on time, if the rainy season begins. That just means they got a leg up on everyone else and they can get their second crop of corn in early. But they're taking a big risk there because, there's been high levels of heat recorded across most of the country, especially to the north, experiencing triple digit weather. And so that newly germinated beans, it's pretty rough on it, when it's going through 100, 110 degree heat after a 5-month dry season with pretty much zero precipitation. So that's kind of where they're at now. It's still early in the season. Mato Grosso really looks to pick up in, I think, early October. And there's not a lot of solid rain forecast yet, even for that. And so there's still plenty of time, I think. But if they get to kind of October 6th or 7th and the rainfall isn't picking up, it could be cause for concern. But I still think then by that point, you'll see guys willing to take that risk and going ahead and starting their planting, hoping that the rain will show up, in a week or two. And so it's okay to plant in the dust, as long as the rain shows up within a week or two at the most, but you don't want to plant in the dust and then, it takes a month for it to show up. And so that's kind of what those Brazilian farmers are working on right now.
So do they, over in Brazil, not use as much irrigation over there and they just rely on weather, or how does that kind of work?
There are certain areas that use more irrigation than others, but and again, it depends on the region, but in the state that I used to live and farm in Bahia, there is a fair amount of irrigation there. But overall, you don't see a lot of it. But it certainly does exist. I think in Mato Grosso, in my last trip there, I was surprised that we saw more and more of it. And so, they can get 2 crops a year on without irrigation. With irrigation, they can get 3 crops a year. And so the typical rotation is soybeans first, then second crop of corn, and then they'll do edible beans in the dry season on irrigation. And so there's pretty much, if you have irrigation in Mato Grosso, you have something growing year round, and you're just going from one crop to the other. And so but you see the irrigation more on specialty crops. You see it a lot more on coffee, a little bit more on cotton, certainly on citrus and different fruits and some specialty crops, things like that. But you don't see it quite as much, I would say, just on soybeans and corn.
So, kind of talking about crops, let's kind of switch over to what you think next season estimates are going to be.
CONAB has already come out with their preseason estimates, and CONAB is basically the Brazil's version of the USDA. It's their government agency that monitors this, and they do see a boost in soybean production yet again next year. They're targeting 162.4 million metric tons, and you compare that to 154 to 156 million metric tons this past season, depending on which agency you want to use. And so a lot of that is coming from yet another increase in acreage. They talked about a 2.8% increase in planted acres, which that 2.8% would be about 3 million acres. And so that actually takes Brazil's total acres to very close to 112 million acres. And you compare that to the United States, which is this year under or pretty close to 87 million acres in Brazil. And so at least harvested acres. Excuse me, that was corn, and I'm thinking of corn. So it's actually closer to 83 million harvested acres here in the United States. And so the gap is widening between the planted acres and soybeans. And I think, however, you're seeing a drop for the first time in probably 6 years in the case of corn acres, and that's just because, similar to what's going on here in our markets, it's kind of the same thing in Brazil, where yes, soybean prices have come down, but they're still profitable. However, corn prices in Brazil are underwater, and it's not profitable, and it's causing farmers to pull back. And so they're actually looking for a reduction in corn production in Brazil due to that. They're targeting a 9% drop in overall production to just under 120 million metric tons compared to 133 to 135 million metric tons, depending on what source you want to use. And so it's kind of notable because Brazil's corn production has been steadily increasing, and I think it was 2017 the last time we had a reduction in corn acres in Brazil. And so I think for next year, that's good news for U.S. farmers that they are pulling back at least their corn production in Brazil, and that means less exports on the market, and so hopefully the United States can fill that gap. And similarly here in the U.S., I think you're going to see for next year a pullback in corn acres as well, because frankly, I think we overdid it this year planting as many corn acres as we did, and the price reflects that now, unfortunately, on the board. And so I think you're going to see a correction back the other way, where we kind of reduce our corn acres and kind of boost our soybean acres. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. They are also, Brazil has 3 different corn crops in Brazil, and so they are, in conjunction with the soybean crop, they are in other areas planting their first corn crop, which is predominantly in the southern part of the country, in Paraná and Rio Grande do Sul and Minas Gerais. Minas Gerais, where my family farms, has actually become the #1 first crop corn producing state. And so they're, overall they plant, I think, close to 11 million acres in that first crop. And so it's not as large as the United States, but it's still a sizable amount of corn. And so they're actively planting that now. and they're probably about 3/4 of the way done there.
All right, that'll do it for this episode. Thanks so much.
Yep, thank you.
For premium content, you can head over to the Comstock Report. Don't forget, hit that subscribe button.